This is episode 160. I wanted to make an episode about SCI, Safari Club International, for quite a while. There's many reasons for that, one of them being that this organization really fascinates me. And another one is to introduce Safari Club International to my European listeners. Some of you might not know what this organization is about, or maybe just heard about them, or maybe you heard about SCI and you know them well, but just curious where they stand at the moment in terms of various issues. And you are listening to this episode right now. We are going to talk about really three main issues that are currently playing out for hunters across the world. And the first one is social perception of hunting, or social acceptance of hunting, or sometimes, like I like to say, social license to hunt. And not long ago, we talked about this very issue with David Scallan from FACE, which is European Organization for Hunting and Conservation. And so today we are going to hear American perspective. Second big item is repeated attempts to ban trophy imports. And when I say trophy imports, that mainly means animals living in Africa, African animals. We heard about the trophy import ban attempt in the UK. They're happening essentially across the world. And since SCI has Safari and International in its name, it is particularly interesting to hear their take on this. And finally, the third big item, again relevant to hunters across the world, is use of lead in hunting ammunition, or use of lead ammunition. We are in the process across the world of phasing out lead ammunition, and there are many facets to it and many approaches of how to do it or how not to do it. And I was also very curious to hear how that situation looks like across the pond in the US of A. And to discuss those three topics, there is just no better person than our guest today, Ben Cassidy, who is Executive Vice President for International Government and Public Affairs. So perfect person, perfect discussion about a cross-section of hunting and politics and social issues, which are largely politics anyway. And now I have nothing else to say, just enjoy the episode. Ben, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Tommy, pleasure to be had. Great to see you. How we doing?
Oh, not too bad, not too bad. It's been a while since we met in Paris, and now here we are doing podcast.
I love it. I didn't have to come all the way back for you. It's good.
Yeah, SCI. I was looking forward to have a podcast like specifically about SCI for a long time. And, you know, I had some people from SCI involved in the chapters. But here you are, Executive Vice President for International Government and Public Affairs. You will elaborate in a second what that means. But because majority of our listeners are located in Europe, and some of them might not even know what SCI is, Safari Club International, would you mind to give us like a quick overview of the history, where SCI came from, and what it does at the moment, and then you can make a quick segue and also tell you what is your role as Executive Vice President in SCI.
Yeah, happy to do so. And thanks so much, Tommy, for having the opportunity to talk about SCI. Been spending a little bit more time in Europe recently with a lot of the activity that's been going on. But yeah, Safari Club International, we're going into our 52nd year of existence. So we were founded in the 70s in Los Angeles, California. A group of like-minded hunters, like to travel, like to hunt. So started off really as a club, and it's grown into something much bigger, I think, as it's become necessitated. Really international hunting, conservation, advocacy organization, member-driven, built off of chapters that are throughout the world, mostly based in the U.S., with a good, strong presence in Canada, Europe, Australia, New Zealand. We celebrated our 50th in Nevada. We'd always have like this big hunters gala every year. It's really our centerpiece to the year, kind of kicks things off. It's always at the beginning of the new year. Had it in Nevada for 50 years, recently moved it to Nashville, Tennessee. But that's really, the one time of the year where we have everybody come in that's a part of the organization, whether it's the members, the folks that volunteer, our exhibitors, elected officials, or say, wildlife management authorities from different range countries, kind of all come together and kind of create that soup, that gumbo that is, Safari Club International. I have the great privilege in my job of overseeing our office in Washington, D.C., which is really, our global headquarters for everything we do on advocacy, communications, and marketing. My background has always been in the government affairs space. I was a volunteer for SCI. I was a paying member, early on. I worked in government where SCI would lobby me, and tell me how we had to do more for hunters. And I agreed. And then I was fortunate enough to see a position open up and come out and started actually getting paid by them for what I do. So yeah, I have the really good fortune of overseeing an incredible team, very varied. We have lobbyists, we have lawyers, we have comm specialists, really full suite that focuses in on, our mission, which is, to be first for hunters, to defend the freedom to hunt and conservation worldwide. I think from our vantage point on that international scale, you really see a lot of the things that go on that challenge or maybe threaten hunting or seem to be really interconnected. I always say you see one bad idea, it travels a lot faster than the good idea. Something that's happening in Brussels that's of concern doesn't take very long to be a problem in California and then a problem in Washington, D.C. So I think it's really requires, from the hunting side, having, kind of that sentinel that's able to always watch what's happening and be able to move and defend and put our voice in front of places.
When I look at SCI and activity online and other things, that this is the impression I'm getting. It's like a lot of lawyers, like you said, the policy people who are you're very, very serious about what you're doing from that perspective. And so I just want to go into the first a main item I want to discuss with you, which is social attitude to hunting and social license to hunt and everything that's going on. And I start with a little bit of story. A few years ago, I watched on YouTube a 30-second spot that the SCI had called Trigger. Join SCI and Trigger anti-hunting extremists for free now. And I was laughing. I was just saying, oh man, I wish FACE, which is European Federation for Hunting and Conservation for listeners, I wish FACE was more like SCI and obviously, fast forward number of years, and it's clear to me and for all those hunting organizations, both local and international, that it's not the right way to communicate about hunting, because as a hunters we are in minority, and if you're confrontational and want to trigger anti-hunter and you're in the minority, that usually doesn't end up well for the minority. And I see this being recognized, and very positive move is going on across many organizations. FACE is hiring persons specifically for the job of communicating with non-hunting. CIC is rebranding and changing for Rewild, Restore. I would like to hear from you how that situation looked like in SCI, how SCI came to the realization that there is a need for some change, and how that change, what that change is, how it is being implemented.
No, that's a great question, great point. I mean, coming into the job at SCI, right? I mentioned that I've always been in government affairs, and what brings me to SCI and the role I have is I love politics and I love hunting, right? I've never found anything other than hunting where I can go into any single room and be able to just with blind faith just say it is a good thing and it's doing incredible things for the planet, and everybody should go out there and say thank you to a hunter, thank you to an angler, right? That's what brought me to it. And being in politics, you can become very pessimistic, right? You just see how the sausage is made. It's not always clean. It's not a good thing, right? But what I've seen from our vantage point at SCI is with hunting, we have the facts. Now, sometimes our arguments can come across to someone that has no idea what hunting is as being a paradox, being contradictory. How do you kill something to save something? When you provide the facts, and if you provide testimony from folks that are directly affected by it, hand them over. I think 95%, 99% of the time, you change minds on it, right? And we've seen it time and again where there's been discussions around, say, shutting down trophy bans. And it's happening amongst people that have never been to the countries that they're talking about shutting them down from. And we've been able to see, like, somebody from that actual country, say it's Zimbabwe, go and present in front of, these elected bodies and talk about it, change their minds, have them scrap it. So I just think it's incredible to see, and the power that we have within our community of having the facts, being able to present them, and people are just people. They're able to sort it out from there and make their minds up. So I think that's a key piece. And with SCI, what I pride ourselves on is being very thorough in reporting factual news, being very thorough on understanding what the situation is, translating it to mass audience, then they're able to be educated on it, and then being able to point folks on who to be able to tell the facts to. So it's education and activation. I don't think that you really have to, play games with it in a cynical sort of way to be able to get your message across when we already have the high ground, right? And I think sometimes as like a hunting community, we can be blind to or forget about it. But at the end of the day, we're the ones that are doing the right thing. We don't have to go low to stay high, right?
What is your view on the opinion that, we have those facts and we have all the data we wanted for years?
Yep.
And it is not exactly that we as the hunters or hunting community is winning that battle for, hearts and souls of the non-hunters, right? And one of the views is like, what we're missing is the emotional message.
Yep.
And you I'm sure you heard that all the whether this is like anti-hunting movement or it is, the message is highly emotional and emotions are always winning over facts. So and that's why this like over years we've probably been over reliant on facts. So I'm just wondering, like, how does it look like? Do you disagree with that, or is there like an aspect of it, like messaging for non-hunting people who are, like they're not gonna read the paper, they're not gonna analyze, table of the data. It's like, oh, this animal, right? It has eyelashes, and they killing, and that's an emotional message that is like I said, travels like wildfire.
Yeah, you can say it in a quick soundbite. It's a lot easier than explaining. You're explaining, you're losing those arguments.
Yes.
Which makes it, it makes the playing field much more difficult. And I think it does put the onus on hunters to be able to get our message out beyond, our own bubble. Like I said, it's hard to distill it into emotions. And I think that's playing cheap with like what we actually hold in facts. And I don't know why we walk away from the facts to try to play an emotional game. I think that the other side can be pretty good at mischaracterizing hunters, making us feel like we're, soulless and heartless. I mean, that can be fed into things where we're able to show that a little bit more clearly. But I would hate to try to sell ourselves short and cheap in our own messages to play with just pure emotion, just because it's working for the other side. It's disingenuous. I wouldn't be comfortable with it.
Yeah, I get your point.
It makes for a very complicated dialogue. I think it goes across a number of different societal issues too, where you just see emotion winning the day against sound reason. And I don't know if it's a new thing. It's obviously been supercharged with the way information flies around. But again, it's like maybe it's part of why I get such a kick out of like actually holding that trump card on the facts, right? And it takes a little bit more work, but it's incredible just to see it when you have someone that's just like basically making their mind up. They have all the keys to the city. They can make the decisions, and they're all for ending hunting because it's just abhorrent, it's horrible, and they say it like that until they see somebody that comes in and it's a mom from say Zambia. Explaining how this is, essential to their livelihood, to their safety, and just seeing them turn white and their jaw drop and walking them off of that. I mean, one heart at a time, right? It's not happening over a post that goes on to Instagram and gets your billion hearts on it. But
I guess that's where people like you comes to play, where you actually, with your political background and like you say, you're enjoying politics, you have an in. You know where you can go and present the facts.
Yep.
Because then again, this is, like you said, this is not that we're gonna post the facts on social media and everybody goes like, oh, I guess hunting is good. And you're, so what I understand, that you go directly to policymakers whose job is actually to look at the data rather than being emotional.
Well, so it's me going, or one of the folks on our team, but don't get me wrong, like the doors that we walked into open and the strength of our voice are there because of our membership, right? Like nobody just says, I want to have a meeting with Ben Cassidy, right? They say they want to meet with Safari Club International. That's because of our members. And the one thing that, you know, we've always focused on is equipping our members with the facts, having them be able to present them too. And, you know, I mean, it's different from, you know, country to country, obviously, but like with the American system, you know, members of Congress have to take in those comments that come in. They've got to consider them. You'll get a response. You know, they'll weigh things off of it. So that's a big deal to have our membership light up, directly speak directly to their members. I mean, you see it too, I guess, you know, in Europe, we talk about FACE, like that incredible petition that they did, right, with the signatures on it. I mean, that's foreign to me. Obviously, it's foreign to me. It's in Europe, but it's foreign to me in the concept that petitions in Brussels, you know, there's petty, right? It's an entire commission basically that's dedicated to receiving petitions and considering them and having them apply into actual policy making. Like that doesn't exist. I mean, we have change.org, but there's nobody in like government that takes those and says, we have to act on this. We've heard from this many people. I mean, there's power in that sort of outreach. But you know, I mean, but if it's just like, I mean, down to facts, like, I mean, like pure emotion. I mean, you look at where all the wildlife, say in Africa, is thriving. It's where it's being hunted, right? I mean, and then you put that with the image of, you know, an affected family, and you know that'll turn some hearts. But the way that they do it on the other side, where it purposely doesn't tell the story. I mean, it's not good. That's just that,
of course,
abusing the system.
Yeah. Ben, tell me, when I listen to your podcast, or by the way, First for Hunters is your podcast, right? SCI.
Yeah, thanks.
But also when I listen to communication that's going in, it feels like this is like a besieged city. Like, you know, access is going to be taken away and the hunting rights going to be taken away and all these things. And where I'm sitting, you know, to me, and I'm sure to many European listeners, like, you know, like America is this like a best place to hunt ever because there's many hunters. There's a huge, like a middle class of hunters. There's a lot of them. Access to guns is just frictionless compared to Europe or Ireland, like where I am. There's like no issue at all. And then, so we have this picture of like, you know, you have a public lands where you can go and hunt, and you have all those animals and access to guns and many hunters, all those things. And then you listen to messages and it feels like almost it's just on the brink of being shut down. So I just want you to lay it out to us, you know, how that situation looks like in the United States, really. You know, what is the social acceptance of hunting?
Yeah.
And how big are those threats to hunting?
All right, this is a good one to unpack. I like the way you tee it up too, because we do have a deep, rich tradition, say, in the United States for hunting, right? I think that, you know, when I've been over in Europe and we talk about, like, say, social acceptance, a lot of the times people look to the numbers that we have for our social acceptance in the United States and say, you know, that's kind of a gold standard. You know, other countries would say, how do we get to that, you know, 82%? I don't know what the exact numbers, but it's very high, like approval rating on hunting. I would say that society, social acceptance, social license, all of that is constantly dynamic. We've talked about how, you know, discourse has changed. Everything's dynamic. I would say that we see it across the globe. It can be in Ireland. It can be United States with urbanization, people moving away from countryside, where there's a disconnect from what that heritage is. It's kind of in that disconnect, history can be lost, where people forget about why that had some sort of importance, why it mattered to defend it. And I think as we've just seen across the spectrum of issues, you just see everything become politicized and up for grabs. There's just this ongoing, culture war. And for better or for worse, something like conservation has gotten kind of sucked into that. I would say, from what I've experienced in the hunting community, plus what I've experienced with just being in politics, is I have a very strong disdain for complacency and thinking that because today was good, tomorrow is going to be even better. I don't think that is actually the case. I don't consider myself pessimist or I'm very, we hang out, Tommy, very optimistic on things, but I also am very mindful of not accepting status quo, and calling out, when you see something that doesn't seem right. So you mentioned access, right? I mean, from the United States, access has been taken for granted and it's a given. You mentioned our public lands, right? I mean, hundreds of millions of acres that are open on the federal level alone, not even mentioning state, to access. You have the Bureau of Land Management, where 99% of that's open to hunting. Similar number for, open unless closed for our Forest Service. National parks are obviously all closed. Fish and wildlife refuges, I mean, that's part of their doctrine, part of their establishment, is that hunting is an activity that must be accepted for these unless there's a reason not to. So you've got all that access that's out there. But what we've seen from this administration, and it's become a political football, it was even before this administration, is just threats on that access. And then the more you talk with folks, within our membership, the more you realize that access is more than just physically stepping foot somewhere to go hunting. So there's that piece, but then it's also economic. Can I afford it? The most commonly used ammunition out there, lead, right? You see that shut down, that throws the whole system out of place. And now what we've seen over the summer is a shutdown on education programs, where we have really big archery programs in schools. We have hunter education in schools. Really a lot of the places where it's the first introduction to the lifestyle, and maybe will be the only introduction, because as you've seen with access, without a mentor, where do a lot of people go, right? So you have a huge swath there. So there's just 3 legs on a stool where it's directly being affected, and not just this might happen, but it's no, our Department of Education just interpreted a bill that had to do with school safety to say that archery programs cannot be funded. That's bad news. Or literally just seeing, our Fish and Wildlife Service phase out lead, not having any of the science to point to, not having a state management authority who manages the land, it has the wildlife as their resource, saying that it needs to be done, happening. You have unelected bureaucrats shutting down millions of acres of hunting access in Alaska at a time, unelected, just a board of 7 folks saying, we're going to shut it down, opening a comment period, having people say, 9 to 1, don't do this, doesn't matter, shut it down. So just those 3 examples just makes it feel maybe things aren't going to keep going status quo, right? And I'm proud of the position that we're in, where we're not going to be complacent, and we'll call it out and we'll do something about it. On Department of Education, we help break the story. And then because we have we're the one hunting group that, is fully active across the board in courts. So we've filed notice of intent to sue the Department of Education that they need to properly implement that language, interpret it the way Congress intended to. And again, bipartisan, Democrat, Republican, the folks that wrote the bill, they've come out and said, this is not what we meant it to do, right? Then you still have an administration that says, nah, we still read it this way. And if you want it to change, Congress has to change the language. So we're gonna fight on it till they change the language, So, I mean, hate to be grim and dour on it, but I think it's just also a realistic approach, and it's the approach that has to be taken. We want to conserve what's most important to us. Can
you explain that the issue with the archery program? So they were, to that point, they were funded. So they were I don't know whether it's governmental or federal. I don't know these details in the US, but they were funded, and essentially that funding stream was shut down. Does it automatically mean that those programs are done, or is it just that the alternative source of funding needs to be found for them?
So as it would stand now, it's a little bit more complicated. So the schools could still have the programs, but given the way that education has interpreted it, they wouldn't run the program out of the risk of losing all of their funding over it, right? So it's education funds going in. It has a chilling effect. So until there's further clarity on how it affects, they just stop. And really, you have our school system is all starting like this week, next week, last week. So now's when all the programs really start taking off, but you're having them across the board saying, we're not going to do it. The other thing is that's the threat to it as like, a United Nations is you can go to a place that probably is like super pro hunting, like Ruby Red, like Mississippi. And they're going to be like, screw it. Like, we're just going to do the program and we'll find some other way to do it. But I get concerned about other places that are just as important for hunters where you're in, just naming places that have a more diverse population of like California, Maryland, Illinois, New York.
Yeah. New York, I was going to say that.
These places will quickly fold up tents, and that's just a total loss. It's just, yeah, it's a mess, but it's good. Like, we'll have, Congress has been out on recess out of DC for all of August. They all come back in 2 weeks. We're going to have a lot of meetings fired up around that, and there's already legislation introduced to try to fix it. A lot of letters have gone from Congress over the summer to education. Haven't seen responses to them yet. But again, I haven't seen an issue that I can remember in like recent history, at least in the US, that's gotten this much of the community's attention and conversation. Like every meeting that I've been to with other hunting organizations over the last month, it's, one or two on the list of items that we have been discussing. It's just interesting. Some people still take it as like, they just misinterpreted it, maybe they'll change their minds. Like, it's like, well, we can't leave it up to that though, right? We're going to lose a whole year of kids, it's not good. And to go back to social acceptance, right? Because you mentioned that we saw, and I should have looked at it before we got on because I knew we would go to this because it's a great topic. There's constant polling showing how accepted it is in the United States, and it's always been very high. But we've seen it slip in the most recent polling. And that was polling that was done during, the COVID pandemic when everyone was saying hunting is more popular. We sold more hunting licenses and everything. But that social acceptance has dipped. And normally you have something like, well, if you eat it, then it's okay, right? Like, are you okay with hunting if the meat is consumed? Then it's like through the roof, 92%, But even that had like a bit of a slip on it.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so that's obviously top of the agenda too, with everyone talking and you saying, trying to sort through what the issue is there and how to address it. It's the numbers aren't just a blip. It'll be representative of millions of people having changed their minds.
I wonder why. That's the first thing I heard about that.
Yeah.
Ben, listen, you already mentioned, I want to switch gears and go to another big item that I want to discuss with you, which is trophy hunting. We obviously shouldn't put the word trophy before hunting, but as we say, that's how it's packaged. So mainly trophy import bans. It's not the ban on trophy hunting, it's ban on imports. A lot of being said on this subject also on this podcast. And, sitting here in Europe, and obviously the thing is still ongoing in the UK. There were some bans that were attempted. Some of them were passed in other European countries. Even in Poland, there was an attempt that was squashed. But obviously, that's not the end of it. But quite often, what we hear is like, oh, sure, but, UK is just like only 1% or 2% of these hunters. Like, well, what does it matter? And obviously we have the discussion like, yeah, but that sets the precedence. But the United States, this is the really big one. And you are representing Safari Club International. And obviously in the United States, those attempts on trophy import bans are also ongoing as far as I'm concerned. Could you please lay it out to us, how that situation looked like at the moment in the US, and what are the prognosis, and whether this is like on a state level or on federal level, like like the whole picture in the United States as it comes to ban on import of trophies.
Yeah, I mean, it's nonstop attempts, right? And like you kind of said, there's just those different tiers of it where it's, at federal, at state, at courts. It seems like if there's a blockage at the federal level, then they move it to try to do it at the states. There, doesn't work there, try for the courts. But we've prevailed in the courts, which has been nice. What we've seen in the states, the last big attempt at it occurred in California back in, was it 2020, with the Iconic Species Act, and that was defeated. They tried to put it through like a COVID emergency response bill. I don't know where that fits in there, but that's where they tried for it. That was defeated. That was really one of the first times that, I was witness to seeing those local voices talk directly to legislators, and probably like folks that were kind of a-traditional. A big piece that kind of sidelined that and put it out and hasn't come back in California was African voices, leaders out there talking directly to the California Black Caucus. So members of their assembly and Senate, that are African American, hearing from Africans on what the issue was, and the folks that represent like really urban areas that had nothing to do with hunting, but they were just doing it purely off of the emotion and the facts on it. So that was pretty incredible to see that, because there couldn't be a more difficult arena, to try to put anything up in than Sacramento. In Washington, D.C., ever since the whole Cecil the Lion, there's always been a push, and it's come through legislation, which you call it the Cecil Act, and then it's also been attempted through appropriations, right? We have bills every year that go through where Congress, the House specifically, has the authority to fund the whole of government. And in those bills, there would be language that it's not always about what you can pay for, it's what you can't pay for. So there's always language that goes in saying Congress cannot use any funds to process permits into the United States from, list the countries where all our favorite animals are. It's a political football. If you have Democrats, it's become partisan in this way. If there's Democrats running the House of Congress, they'll use their trickery to have it go through without any real, roll call vote. When you see Republicans, you normally don't see it go through. And then the Senate, you work on that side, and then they conference it, and that's where it's kind of played out. We defeated it, every time it's been introduced. It's not in the current House bill right now, and the Cecil Act hasn't been introduced this year. So it's kind of like you get a little bit of pause in having to actually address, like a moving kind of ticking bomb, but that gives us the opportunity to educate people in the absence of the immediate threat and lay the groundwork for before this becomes an issue again, because it'll rear its head again. I mean, it is already all over the place. You mentioned places like Poland. So, I mean, a lot of what we try to do just as a resource is we have really good connections and relationships with, folks that are in Africa from the time we spend over there, and with folks in DC. So a lot of it's just trying to connect them so they, hear the stories and have the understanding and have a resource to go to when a bill is presented. They're told facts by a colleague. They're able to bounce it off of, what people are saying, back on the ground.
And do you think that was the key element of, defeating those bills, or kind of like addressing immediate danger, the actual people from Africa, local people talking directly to the other people who are responsible for policy? Would you say that was the key?
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes a huge difference. We go back to the UK example, and I'll just be blunt with you, Tommy. It's like a lot of these, politicians, they look at making their voting decisions based on are they going to be reelected, right? And I think that when you mention like, only 2% of the people do it in the UK, well, that's how a politician sees it too, right? Like, why would I stick my neck out for something that nobody really, is going to care about? And then from the UK side, the folks that want to ban it, they'd even say it too. It's like, oh yeah, well, it's only 2%. Well, yeah, but we want to be the shining example for the rest of the world so they can copy it, right? But I think that you're able to actually throw some friction into it when you show that it is more than, a free pass for your stump speeches on election trails. When you do show that you will have devastating effects on conservation efforts in places that mean a lot to all of us and we want our kids to experience and their kids, I think that you've got, some good movement. I've been amazed in the UK, which I always just saw their press as being the most difficult, right? I mean, you've got like campaigns of trophy hunting that are funded by like their major periodicals. I mean, they're not even hiding it, right? It's just like crazy. But I never seen until this recent bill this much pro hunting come into the fold, and this many places where I've seen guest columns from different corners of Africa or the scientific community, and not just having a free pass on it. I think that points to a lot of people's effort towards trying to break through on the communication, but it's been pleasantly surprising because I think it's having an effect. I think that when you get to the House of Lords, you could see, maybe I don't think it's ever going to be great coming out of there, but not as bad as it could be, and that benefits everybody, benefits all wildlife.
You mentioned like a pro hunting voices. I'm struggling with that because a lot of those scientists who are, I just kind of seeing like a hunters, like a co-opted scientist. They say, hey, look at the scientists. They're saying, those things. And when you hear what the scientists are saying, most of them say like, yeah, I would ban trophy hunting tomorrow if there was alternative, right? And then I'm listening to that and I'm saying like, man, these guys are not your friends. Just listen what they're saying. Like, and, so this is like sort of, oh, we're gonna defend hunting as long as there is a conservation benefit and there's no viable alternative for that. And I'm always thinking like, what about hunting for hunting's sake? Like, do we, so I see this as quite like a slippery slope, jumping on the bandwagon. I understand this is required for now, but I mean like a long term.
Yep.
Those scientific voices are, some of them at least, are not exactly pro-hunting. They have their own, I don't want to say agenda, but they their own thing, right? The conservation, the preservation of species, which, by the way, is the same thing as hunters want.
Yep.
So I'm wondering, like, is there any way of kind of developing this narrative or developing this fight, let's say, to accept hunting and accept trophies import based on the fact that, we want to do it and it's not detrimental, because otherwise you get in this mode when you constantly needs to explain yourself and find the reason, like, why am I doing this, right? It's like, and then it translates like a regular folks that hunt deer. It's like, oh, I hunt deer because they're invasive species, and I hunt deer because, they're doing agricultural damage, right? And between us, like a bullshit. You hunt because it's fun. You want meat, right? You don't. So I'm just curious your opinion on that.
I totally get it. I've noticed that, and maybe you've had the same experience, and if you haven't, or your listeners haven't, like, just do it as your own social experiment. But the next time that somebody asks you at a cocktail party or wherever you are that's not hunting, they ask you, why do you hunt? You might have, because of how we talk about it, have that like pull on your sleeve to say, well, conservation and the benefit. And try just saying instead, just say, because I like it. And what I've noticed is when you say, because I like it, nobody can ever argue it. There's no response to it. They go, no, Tommy, you don't like it. It's like, no, I do, right? No, you don't. Yes, I do. Like, there's just no arguing it. But yeah, that too, I mean, I always point it out. It's just like, at what point can we just like not admit that it's like the best experiences that you'll ever have in your entire life, and it's fun, just fun, right?
I guess this is the politics aspect comes into play here, right? Because like, oh, if it's like you're killing it for fun, it's
right. Well, that again, when you do like your polling and all that, like when you say, do you hunt for the trophy? Then it's like nobody supports it. Not in America, nowhere else, right? I mean, that doesn't tell the full story, obviously. But yeah, I mean, if they were just to say fun, I mean, who knows how people bend that, right?
Yeah, that's interesting. I just want to get it out there. I just think that a lot of hunters are too quick to label those scientists as pro hunting because they're often anything but.
Totally.
Ben, listen. So now let's move to the another one. Big again across the world. It seems like these threats to hunting are just like across the world, and that is lead. I mean, lead in ammunition, ban on lead, non-toxic ammunition, and obviously this situation is ongoing in the EU. It is also ongoing in the US. I listened to your excellent podcast with the folks from the non-lead partnership, and oh boy, where to start with this? I feel like ultimately there is a reason we don't have leaded petrol anymore, and there's a reason we don't have lead in paint anymore, and there's a reason we don't have lead in cosmetics anymore. We still have it in ammunition, and I saw there's a little bit, maybe like a little criticism of SCA. I saw I think it was a tweet or something where it was like, oh, there is a threat to traditional hunting methods. And I was like, oh, I wonder what this time, right? And I'm listening to this, and it's like, oh, because there's a better, like a non-lead ammunition. It's like, oh man, it's disingenuous. It's hardly traditional hunting. And from your conversation that I listened on your podcast, it is almost like if we ask people to do that and explain, they want to do that. But as soon as this comes down from, a government or something, like, no, we're not going to do this.
Yep.
And to me, it's like, oh, but like, can we just put everything aside? It is actually getting rid of lead from ammunition is probably a good thing. There's like I said, data. There's a lot of data that says that it's a toxin, right? So I'm just curious, like where SCI stands, again, kind of like the same question, different topic, where SCI stands on lead and ban on lead, and how that situation looks like in the US at the moment.
Yeah, again, I have a big issue with, shutting down, and I would call it traditional ammo. That it's a traditional ammunition. I mean, that is what has been used over generations in the United States to go out hunting, and to this day is still used, not with waterfowl. That's all restricted. Everyone was okay with that, and we moved off of lead.
That's already restricted. Is it across is it an entire country?
Yeah, so on all migratory over wetlands, it's across the country. It's all
okay.
It's all steel.
Okay. So no lead shot for birds in the US.
No,
even in Texas.
Even in Texas.
Okay.
It's a fair question. Even in Texas. Yeah. So I mean, that's where it walked off, and that opens a lot of people's eyes too. It's like, oh, so they're trying to ban my deer ammo, and there's one round going off and it's in the earth. I mean, the one cool thing with the Peregrine guys just pointing out, it's like they're not concerned about the lead in the earth. They're concerned about it in the food chain, right? I mean, and what they were doing there, I mean, I find it fascinating. I'd met Chris Parrish there at an event, and we were just hot and heavy on the issue on lead. He's like, I'm with Peregrine Fund. I was like, oh, that's a raptor. This guy's going to have an opinion on lead. I had no idea what he actually, and then he started the non-lead partnership. But just hearing from him too, just like, I mean, there's no doubting this guy's sportsman's credentials, right? I mean, he's dropped the biggest elk. I've seen him fish. He's great at it. We were using lead tackle, by the way. So I was like, he's not disingenuous, but just hearing his approach on it and where we fully agree on it is just like, don't come down with the mandates, so, and Fish and Wildlife has said it too. They got sued by the Center for Biological Diversity. They got asked to just shut it down across the country, and they threw that out. They said, we'll do case by case, which I still have a concern with because the way they're doing it, but they even threw that out. The legislation that we support, that's in response to what's going on at our Fish and Wildlife Service, it's all about having the science available, provided, then having sign off from state management authority, at least having them consulted. I mean, I don't think that's too high of a bar to clear, right? The direct mandate down, it's just not going to work. It's just in human nature, at least in the American ethos, they're not going to respond to mandates. We've seen how it plays out in, big terms, just with around COVID. It just doesn't fly in the States.
Is that not the matter of the availability of the ammunition? Like, at least where I sit, like in the UK and Ireland, I think that the biggest issue is with the availability with, especially like a smaller calibers, like a 223.
Yeah.
And this is like you said that you listened to when I was talking to David Scallan from Face, right? And I said like why we not get like a ammunition manufacturers and talk to them and say like, hey, there is a need for that, because I think there is no way around that ban is coming. It's like whether it's going to be within a year or 10 years, at some point in the future, we will have no lead ammunition. We will have other ammunition. I truly believe that. And I believe this is a good thing in general. But why not, I think that if you go to the shop and buy ammunition that performs as well as, and I'm believe that modern non-lead ammunition performs as good as, and the price is similar, like nobody would even notice, right? I read giving that example of the non-lead petrol, right? When we were like, oh, the car's not gonna run and the car is gonna break down and the automotive industry gonna get bust and whatever. We're like, whatever, 20, 30 years. Like young people, I said like, why it's you, right? Unleaded. Like you never knew any other petrol. I think the same gonna be with lead ammo. Wouldn't that be in the interest of hunters to kind of like speed up this process and make it as frictionless as possible?
I think that's why folks like the Paragon Fund are doing a great job and having those programs in place to educate folks and show them. I mean, knee-jerk reaction, I don't have some sort of affinity to any sort of metal. I mean, not even gold, I guess. I'm not I'm team lead, I just know it's never that way. But the reality of it, I don't work for Federal Ammunition. I got to tour their plant. What is the vast majority of bullets that are coming out of Federal are all made of lead. And who's their number one customer?
Military.
The U.S. government, right? I mean, it's the military. That's how our system's built. Their military's not making their own ammo. They get it from third party. They're contractors for them. They're going to change their entire assembly lines, over a hunting ban. It's not going to happen.
Really? Do you think there is a real danger of actually shortage of ammunition?
I mean, we've seen shortages before. If you were to ban lead and not have this infrastructure to do, other metals, possibly. But again, like we were talking about, having an alternative that is effective at getting the job done, great, bring it. But at the same cost, show it to me. I just don't know what other metals is cheap as lead.
But I guess the environmental aspects need to be taken into account, or even health, right? I mean, it's oh, how much lead do you consume when you shoot the deer with a lead ammunition? But then when you shoot the deer for 10, 20 years, all of a sudden you're talking about the lifetime exposure to lead. So what's this state of play at the moment in the United States? Is this one of the active issues that you're working on, or is it kind of a sleeping and just waiting for, its prime time again?
No, it's ongoing. I mean, really, the big inflection points that we've seen are taking place with the Fish and Wildlife Service. Every year before the season starts, they come out with the hunt fish rule for the upcoming season. And that, in the past, so when I worked at Interior, a big piece of it was opening up a lot of access to new hunting opportunities, adding, opportunities on new species and just more physical land, and it was always kind of like a big old Christmas tree of good stuff for hunters. But in the last couple of years, it's kind of changed to where it's looking through it to see what it's going to shut down. And what we're seeing is it's going refuge by refuge in their management plans with, doing phase outs, lead will be phased out of this by 2025. Like I'd mentioned, they were sued by Center for Biological Diversity, asking for them to shut it down everywhere. That was tossed. It didn't happen. So what we're really seeing is kind of little fires being set around it. And that's why, in Congress, two of SCI's past legislators of the year have introduced language that would address it, saying, if Fish and Wildlife is going to come up with one of these rules, they need to provide actual science and then be able to, have state, local authority, sign off on it as well. Because what we've seen is like some of the refuges, they'll put it in there saying it needs to be closed down for purposes of health, and it'll even say within there that they don't have any science showing that it's ever affected anybody's health, but maybe one day we will show you that science. It's like,
and is SCA talking to ammunition manufacturers, saying like, "Where is our non-lead ammunition? We want them, and we want a lot and cheap of them." Like, are you doing like outreach to manufacturers to ensure that at the same time they're working on the alternatives?
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's again like the market decides, and I know that they are. I mean, we have good relationships with a lot of the manufacturers. Like again, like got to visit Federal's plant a couple of years ago and kind of see how they do it. I know that they've come out with a lot of different bullets, that have shown well in testing. Yeah, I mean, we don't try to lobby manufacturers to change their business practices.
Yeah, maybe you should. Listen, okay. So before I let you go, we're gonna be wrapping this up shortly. I would like you to give to all the hunters who are listening to this, give like a advice, like a words of wisdom in terms of how to conduct yourself to ensure the future of hunting. How to speak with people who might or might not be supportive of hunting, how to, what to post and what not to post on social media, how to like, what is the, 10 or whatever, 5 points that you would like to, communicate to hunters to ensure that we are, in a good standing and we have like a good social license to hunt?
Yeah, that's a great question. Great way to close it up. I would say I live in a suburb of Washington, D.C. It's a city, right? I'm able to get out to go hunting pretty easily, but the neighborhood I live in, I'm pretty much surrounded by mostly people that don't hunt. And maybe that makes me like kind of a curiosity. But I've never really found myself, in a position where I felt like I wasn't able to get across to folks, why it matters to me. Maybe I just kind of wear it on my sleeve and wear it on my face with enthusiasm when I talk about it. But I think it does honestly go back to some of the, I do it because it's fun. But I think it comes through, kind of anecdotes about what you experienced. It's like everything outside of even just the pulling of the trigger, With a lot of the people, like when I can talk about like the hunt that I did, like I'll see my neighbors around a bonfire at night, and earlier that day I'd gone out an hour and a half across the Bay Bridge, the Chesapeake, to go hunt. I can come back and just explain like the sunrise I saw, the sounds I heard, the experience I had, and there's not one person out there that doesn't have something in them that makes them a bit jealous. About
you see, emotional language that we're talking about is like right there.
Real, right? I mean, and just being able to, I think anytime I share those things, it at least makes interest. And sometimes folks will say that they want to come out and see it too. Always take them up on that offer, right? Any sort of exposure to it and seeing what it actually is rather than what's in their head. And that's where one of the biggest disconnects is. I mean, a lot of the times having done it, you make all these assumptions about other people, where they're even coming from. I mean, there's such a disconnect. Like some people might just think that it's like covering yourself in like really bright orange and screaming and running through the woods, right? Like they don't have any idea. So I think a lot of it just goes back to explaining kind of what that common ground is. And sometimes when I couch it, it's just like, maybe they're going to come out of it a little jealous that they didn't really, live the full day that was lived. On posting, I think it's always down to just, what's tasteful. I mean, I think that what I see a lot of are thoughtful captions that are, assigned to it also, in a trophy photo, just something that else is just explaining, what the full experience meant to you, what the aftermath of it all was. I think, again, it is just like the storytelling and not letting it be seen for one thing, but trying to give it the full context, I think makes the world a difference.
Ben, that's a smart words. Thank you so much for your time. You get it. You're doing a great job. And hunters needs more people like you and more like attitudes and connection between like a real deal hunting and then politics, and kind of try to do the best for hunters. So thank you so much.
Absolutely, Tommy. It's been a great pleasure. I'm glad it finally all came together, especially the day before deer season opens in Ireland.
Yes, it's opens tomorrow. It's the 31st of August. While we're recording this, I'm going hunting tomorrow.
Good on you. Yeah, dove season opens for us. I don't know if that's controversial over there, but it's a big deal over here. So
Excellent. See you next time.
thanks, Tommy. Looking forward.